The late 12th century was a time of relentless conflict, political intrigue, and dramatic power shifts in the Levant. For nearly a century, the Crusader states, kingdoms carved from the eastern Mediterranean during the First Crusade, had struggled to maintain their foothold in the region. By the 1170s and 1180s, the Kingdom of Jerusalem, the most prominent Crusader state, was under constant threat from a rising force that would come to dominate the Islamic world. Saladin, the Kurdish-born general whose ambition and military genius would make him one of the most formidable leaders of his era. The mounting tension between the Crusaders and Saladin was not only a story of clashing armies, but also of clashing ideologies, faiths, and ambitions. Saladin, or Salah ad-Din Yusuf ibn Ayyub, had been appointed vizier of Egypt in 1169 and quickly consolidated power. He was a man of extraordinary strategic vision, combining political cunning with unrelenting military ambition. By the 1170s, he had established the Ayyubid dynasty, uniting Egypt and Syria under his leadership and presenting the Crusader states with a threat unlike any they had faced before. Unlike previous Muslim rulers, who often fought amongst themselves, Saladin had the rare advantage of centralized authority and a clear, cohesive vision, the liberation of Jerusalem from Crusader control. For Saladin, Jerusalem was not merely a city, it was a symbol of religious and political authority, and its possession had the potential to cement his legacy as a unifier of the Muslim world. The Crusader states, meanwhile, were facing internal difficulties that would prove crucial in the rising tension. Jerusalem, the jewel of the Crusader kingdoms, was geographically vulnerable, surrounded by hostile territories and often plagued by political discord. Leadership was unstable, with young or inexperienced rulers sometimes at the helm. The nobility was divided, and alliances were fragile. This internal weakness made the Crusaders increasingly aware that Saladin's growing power was not a distant threat, it was an imminent danger. Reports of his campaigns, the capture of key fortresses, and the sheer size of his forces sent waves of anxiety through Jerusalem and other Crusader strongholds. Saladin's approach to warfare was also a source of growing concern. He combined traditional military strategies with careful psychological tactics. Unlike the Crusaders, who often relied on heavily armored knights in direct confrontation, Saladin's forces were mobile, disciplined, and versatile. His army included skilled horsemen, archers, and infantry, and he was adept at using terrain and surprise to his advantage. By the early 1180s, his campaigns had shown that he could take large, fortified cities, ambush smaller forces, and orchestrate strategic retreats when necessary, all the while keeping the Crusaders off balance and constantly on the defensive. Religious motivation added another layer to the tension. Both the Crusaders and Saladin framed their conflicts in terms of divine duty. For the Crusaders, defending Jerusalem was not only a political obligation, but a sacred mission sanctioned by God. For Saladin, jihad against the Crusader states carried immense religious significance, symbolizing the reclamation of lands that had been under Muslim control before the First Crusade. This spiritual framing intensified the stakes on both sides and made compromise increasingly unlikely. Any military victory or defeat carried consequences far beyond immediate territorial gains. It was about honor, legitimacy, and divine favor. By the mid-1180s, Saladin's successes had significantly destabilized the balance of power. His victories at key locations, such as Aleppo and Damascus, expanded his influence and provided him with a strong logistical base for further campaigns. Meanwhile, Jerusalem's leaders were acutely aware of their vulnerability. The Crusader states were heavily reliant on fortifications and knights, yet their forces were fragmented and often outnumbered. Intelligence about Saladin's movements was scarce, and sometimes unreliable, further increasing the tension and paranoia within the Crusader leadership. One particularly worrying factor for the Crusaders was Saladin's ability to rapidly mobilize large armies. Reports of his force sizes, sometimes numbering in the tens of thousands, were staggering compared to the small, elite, but numerically inferior knights available to defend the Crusader states. Jerusalem, for instance, could muster only a few hundred well-trained knights under normal circumstances. This discrepancy created an environment where even minor skirmishes had the potential to escalate into catastrophic battles. The Crusaders knew that if Saladin chose to strike at the heart of Jerusalem with his full might, their city could fall in a single campaign. Moreover, Saladin's strategy was not solely military. He sought to weaken the Crusader states through alliances, diplomacy, and psychological warfare. By negotiating truces with certain Christian rulers while simultaneously attacking others, he created uncertainty and instability within the Crusader ranks. His reputation as a fair but relentless leader also preceded him. Tales of his mercy toward those who surrendered and his ruthless punishment of those who resisted created fear and admiration in equal measure. This duality kept the Crusaders constantly guessing, unsure when or where Saladin might strike next. The tension between the Crusaders and Saladin reached its peak in late 1177, just prior to the Battle of Montgisard. Saladin had already embarked on a campaign that threatened to sweep through the kingdom of Jerusalem and strike at its very heart. The Crusaders were aware that an encounter with Saladin's massive army was inevitable, yet they were unsure if they could mount an effective defense. The stakes could not have been higher. Failure meant not only territorial loss but the potential collapse of Crusader morale and the symbolic defeat of their cause in the Holy Land. This rising tension set the stage for one of the most remarkable and improbable military encounters in medieval history. The forces of a small, beleaguered kingdom would soon confront the overwhelming might of a master strategist who commanded tens of thousands of soldiers. The decisions made in those tense weeks, the intelligence gathered, and the leadership displayed would determine the fate of the Crusader states, and the legend of King Baldwin IV and his knights would begin to take shape. In retrospect, the Battle of Montgisard was not just a confrontation between two armies. It was the culmination of years of political maneuvering, strategic planning, and the mounting tension between two very different worlds. The stage was set, the players were in place, and history was about to witness a dramatic clash that would defy expectations and cement the reputations of both the Crusaders and Saladin in the annals of history. The annals of medieval history, few figures stand out as vividly as King Baldwin IV of Jerusalem, a ruler whose courage, intelligence, and indomitable spirit shone brightly despite the cruel affliction of leprosy, known as the Leper King. Baldwin ascended to the throne of Jerusalem in 1174 at the tender age of 13. The young king inherited a kingdom that was both strategically vital and politically fragile. Beset by external threats from Muslim forces under the rising power of Saladin and internal divisions among the Crusader nobility. Baldwin's story is not only one of military heroism, but also of personal resilience, leadership under unimaginable pressure, and the extraordinary capacity of a small kingdom to withstand a seemingly unstoppable force. Baldwin's leprosy, a disease that gradually deformed his body and sapped his strength, was diagnosed early in his adolescence. In an era where physical ability was often synonymous with authority, this could have been a catastrophic handicap. Yet Baldwin defied expectations. Rather than retreating from leadership or delegating responsibilities entirely to regents and advisors, he embraced the mantle of kingship with remarkable determination. He trained rigorously in martial skills, mastered the intricacies of strategy and diplomacy, and cultivated the respect and loyalty of his knights and vassals. His courage in the face of illness inspired those around him, reinforcing the unity of a kingdom constantly threatened by external aggression and internal dissent. The kingdom of Jerusalem, though small in territory, was a prize coveted by many. It had been established in 1099 after the First Crusade and was centered around the holy city of Jerusalem. By Baldwin's reign, the kingdom's borders were precarious, with the Muslim-controlled territories of Syria and Egypt lying just beyond its frontiers. The Crusader states were a patchwork of fortified cities, castles, and feudal holdings, and the kingdom's survival depended heavily on the loyalty and military prowess of its knights. Baldwin recognized that the security of Jerusalem rested not solely on fortificati, but on the strategic deployment of his limited forces and the cultivation of alliances with other Crusader states and European powers. Despite his youth and illness, Baldwin displayed an acute political acumen. He navigated the treacherous waters of the Crusader nobility, who were often divided by personal ambition and rivalries. He knew that internal unity was essential if his kingdom were to withstand Saladin's growing power. Baldwin carefully balanced the ambitions of powerful barons, ensuring that no single noble gained enough influence to threaten his authority, while simultaneously motivating them to defend the kingdom with unwavering commitment. His diplomatic skills were equally notable. He maintained correspondence with European monarchs, leveraged the presence of military orders, such as the Knights Templar and the Knights Hospitaller, and fostered alliances with neighboring states to create a buffer against Saladin's forces. Baldwin's physical affliction, rather than being purely a liability, also shaped his unique approach to warfare and leadership. He understood that he could not lead from the front in prolonged campaigns, as his leprosy would limit his endurance. Instead, he relied on precise planning, the mobility and skill of his knights, and the element of surprise to counterbalance the numerical superiority of his enemies. This strategic mindset would become critical in the events leading up to the Battle of Montgisard, where Baldwin's ability to exploit terrain, timing, and the psychological impact of an audacious attack turned a desperate situation into a legendary victory. The young king's reputation for courage and decisiveness was well known, and it played a significant role in maintaining morale among his troops. Knights who might have otherwise been reluctant to confront overwhelming odds drew inspiration from Baldwin's personal example. Tales of his unwavering presence on the battlefield, despite the debilitating effects of leprosy, circulated throughout the kingdom and beyond. This combination of moral authority, charisma, and tactical skill helped solidify Baldwin's legitimacy in the eyes of his subjects and deter potential usurpers within the Crusader hierarchy. Baldwin's leadership was also shaped by the constant awareness of Saladin's ambitions. Reports of Saladin's victories and the size of his army created an atmosphere of urgency and vigilance in Jerusalem. The king knew that a single defeat could spell disaster for the kingdom, yet he refused to succumb to fear. Instead, Baldwin took proactive measures to strengthen his forces, train his knights, and prepare for confrontations that would test the very limits of his resolve. His leadership style emphasized flexibility, rapid decision-making, and the intelligent use of intelligence and reconnaissance, which allowed him to respond effectively to Saladin's maneuvers. One of Baldwin's most remarkable qualities was his ability to inspire loyalty despite the political instability and factionalism that plagued the Crusader states. He cultivated close relationships with his knights, valuing merit and bravery over rank and wealth. This approach ensured that even in a kingdom rife with potential betrayal, Baldwin could rely on a core of fiercely devoted warriors. These knights would become the backbone of the Crusader defense, and their unwavering loyalty would prove crucial in the coming confrontation with Saladin's vastly superior forces. Beyond military and political considerations, Baldwin was also keenly aware of the symbolic importance of Jerusalem. The city's religious and cultural significance made it a focal point of the Crusades, and its defense carried profound implications for the morale of the entire Christian world. Baldwin's reign, therefore, was not merely about defending territory, but about protecting a sacred legacy. Every decision, every deployment of troops, and every strategic maneuver was infused with this understanding of Jerusalem's symbolic weight. The young king's consciousness of his historical and religious responsibility added a layer of gravity to his leadership that few rulers of his age or condition could match. The combination of Baldwin's strategic foresight, moral authority, and personal courage created a fragile yet resilient kingdom capable of standing against overwhelming odds. By the time Saladin launched his campaign that would culminate in the Battle of Montgisard, Baldwin had already demonstrated that he was not a passive ruler waiting for disaster to strike. He was a proactive, decisive leader, fully aware of the dangers his kingdom faced and determined to seize every opportunity to protect it. In summary, King Baldwin IV was far more than a symbolic figurehead or a tragic victim of disease. He was a brilliant tactician, a shrewd diplomat, and a source of inspiration for his people and soldiers alike. His reign, though marked by personal suffering and political fragility, laid the groundwork for one of the most extraordinary military victories in medieval history. By combining courage, intelligence, and a deep understanding of both his enemies and his own resources, Baldwin prepared Jerusalem for the confrontation that would define his legacy. It was this extraordinary combination of qualities, vision, resilience, and leadership in the face of near impossible odds that allowed a small kingdom and its Leper King to defy the expectations of history and confront one of the most formidable military minds of the medieval world, Saladin. By the late 1170s, Saladin had firmly established himself as a military and political powerhouse in the Near East. After consolidating control over Egypt as vizier and later unifying Syria under his command, he became the undisputed leader of a vast and disciplined force, driven not only by political ambition but also by religious fervor. His eyes were set on the Kingdom of Jerusalem, the jewel of the Crusader states, a prize that held immense strategic and symbolic significance. In the months leading up to the Battle of Montgisard in 1177, Saladin began assembling what would become a formidable army, reportedly numbering around 26,000 men, a force that dwarfed the comparatively tiny contingent of Crusader knights under King Baldwin IV. Saladin's army was a remarkable blend of different units, carefully organized to maximize both mobility and firepower. It included heavy cavalry, the backbone of any medieval army, capable of charging enemy lines and breaking formations with shock and intimidation. Complementing them were skilled horse archers, experts in mounted combat who could harass and weaken opponents from a distance before retreating to avoid direct confrontation. Infantry units, including seasoned foot soldiers and light troops, provided the necessary support for sieges, guarding supply lines, and reinforcing strategic positions. The diversity and organization of Saladin's army made it a highly adaptable force, capable of responding to the dynamic conditions of medieval warfare. The logistical feat of assembling and maintaining such a vast force cannot be overstated. Armies of this size required careful planning and coordination to ensure adequate supplies of food, water, and equipment.
Saladin was not only a brilliant battlefield strategist, but also an astute administrator, capable of mobilizing resources across vast territories. He maintained communication lines between Egypt, Syria, and the Levant, ensuring that his forces remained well supplied and capable of rapid movement. The ability to arm such a large army over long distances gave Saladin a significant advantage over the Crusaders, whose small kingdom struggled with limited manpower and resources. In addition to sheer numbers, Saladin's confidence and previous victories played a key role in the psychological dimension of the campaign. By 1177, he had already captured key fortresses and cities in the region, demonstrating his ability to defeat both Muslim and Crusader forces. Tales of his success traveled quickly, instilling fear and uncertainty among the Crusaders.
The prospect of facing a 26,000-strong army, led by a commander renowned for both strategic brilliance and ruthlessness, was enough to unsettle even seasoned knights. Saladin's reputation alone exerted a psychological pressure that complemented the physical threat posed by his army. Saladin's strategic approach to Jerusalem was deliberate and multifaceted. Unlike some military leaders who relied solely on frontal assaults, he was a master of maneuver warfare. He understood the terrain of the Levant intimately, using mountains, rivers, and desert plains to his advantage. His campaign aimed to encircle and isolate key Crusader strongholds, cutting off reinforcements and supplies before striking decisive blows. This approach minimized unnecessary risk while maximizing the impact of his superior numbers, allowing him to dictate the terms of engagement. However, Saladin's confidence was not unfounded. The numerical superiority of his army meant that, in a conventional battle, the Crusaders would almost certainly be overwhelmed. Reports suggested that the Crusaders could muster only a few hundred knights at full strength, along with a small contingent of infantry and militia. This disparity, combined with the fatigue and logistical challenges of the Crusader states, seemed to promise an easy victory for Saladin. He expected to march on Jerusalem with overwhelming force and secure a decisive triumph, consolidating his power and weakening the Crusader presence permanently. Yet, Saladin's army, despite its size and reputation, faced its own challenges. Large armies were cumbersome and difficult to maneuver, particularly through the rough terrain of southern Palestine. Maintaining cohesion among diverse units, some of which had different languages, traditions, and levels of training, required constant oversight. Supply lines, though carefully managed, remained vulnerable to disruption. Moreover, the confidence that came with numerical superiority sometimes bred complacency, leading to underestimation of smaller, well-led forces. These factors would prove crucial in the events that followed at Montgisard. The march toward Jerusalem was also marked by Saladin's careful use of intelligence and reconnaissance. Scouts and informants were deployed to monitor Crusader movements, identify weak points in fortifications, and gather information on terrain and local resources. Saladin understood that knowledge was as critical as force in medieval warfare, and he sought to eliminate uncertainty wherever possible. However, intelligence in this era was never perfect. Reports could be delayed, exaggerated, or misinterpreted, and overconfidence in one's information could lead to disastrous outcomes, a vulnerability that the Crusaders would exploit. Religious motivation and propaganda also played a role in Saladin's march. His campaign was framed as a holy struggle to reclaim Jerusalem and defend Islam against the Crusaders. This framing bolstered the morale of his troops, providing a sense of purpose beyond mere conquest. Soldiers were motivated not only by duty and loyalty, but also by a shared belief in the righteousness of their cause. The spiritual dimension added intensity to the campaign and reinforced the cohesion of his forces, making them a formidable opponent in both morale and capability. As Saladin advanced, the Crusaders grew increasingly anxious. Jerusalem's limited forces scrambled to gather intelligence, fortify key positions, and prepare for what seemed an inevitable confrontation. King Baldwin IV, despite his leprosy and the small size of his army, began formulating strategies to counter Saladin's numerical advantage. The contrast between the massive, confident army of Saladin and the fragile but determined Crusader kingdom highlighted the dramatic imbalance that would define the Battle of Montgisard. By the time Saladin's forces approached the vicinity of Montgisard in November 1177, the stage was set for a confrontation that would test every aspect of leadership, strategy, and courage. Saladin expected to face a weak resistance that would crumble before his superior numbers. He anticipated a swift victory that would further cement his dominance in the region. Yet, the combination of terrain, timing, and the audacity of King Baldwin IV would turn what seemed an inevitable triumph. into one of the most stunning defeats in medieval military history. Saladin's march toward Jerusalem illustrates the complexities of medieval warfare, the interplay of strategy, logistics, morale, intelligence, and sheer numbers. It underscores how even the most powerful and well-prepared forces can be vulnerable to smaller, well-led opponents who exploit terrain, surprise, and audacity. The coming battle would demonstrate that victory is never guaranteed, no matter how overwhelming the odds may appear. In summary, Saladin's advance toward Jerusalem was marked by meticulous planning, massive mobilization, and unshakable confidence. His 26,000-strong army represented a formidable threat to the Crusader states, combining mobility, discipline, and the psychological weight of prior victory. Yet, this very confidence, along with the logistical and operational challenges of commanding such a large force, would contribute to his undoing. The stage was now perfectly set for an encounter at Montgisard that would defy expectations and etch the names of both Saladin and King Baldwin IV into history. The Battle of Montgisard is remembered not only for its astonishing outcome, but also for the audacious tactics employed by King Baldwin IV. Facing an army of 26,000 men led by the formidable Saladin, Baldwin had at his disposal only a small force of roughly 500 knights and a few thousand infantry. The numerical disparity seemed insurmountable, yet the Leper King, aware that conventional tactics would be suicidal, chose a strategy that relied on surprise, precise timing, and an intimate understanding of both the terrain and the psychology of his enemy. This combination of boldness, strategy, and audacity would turn what seemed an impossible confrontation into a legendary victory. The Crusader kingdom's leadership had been closely monitoring Saladin's movements. Scouts and spies reported the location and size of his forces, giving Baldwin a clear but terrifying picture of the imminent threat. Saladin, confident in his overwhelming numbers, had extended his army along the coastal plains of southern Palestine, moving toward the city of Ramla and beyond, with the intent of advancing into the heart of the Kingdom of Jerusalem. He expected minimal resistance, assuming the Crusaders would either retreat or be crushed in a head-on confrontation. Baldwin, however, recognized the opportunity hidden within the enemy's overconfidence. The key to Baldwin's plan lay in surprise. Rather than waiting defensively within the fortifications of Jerusalem, he decided to take the fight to the enemy, striking quickly before Saladin could fully consolidate his forces. This approach was risky in the extreme. Engaging an army over 50 times the size of his own was a gamble that could have resulted in total annihilation if anything went wrong. Yet Baldwin understood that hesitation would only allow Saladin to encircle Jerusalem, cutting off supplies and reinforcements, and perhaps even laying siege to the city. The alternative, an audacious strike, offered the slim chance of exploiting the vulnerabilities inherent in a large, overextended army. Baldwin's decision to march his small force toward Saladin required careful logistical planning. Every knight and soldier had to be ready for rapid movement, with minimal supplies to avoid slowing the march. The Crusaders moved under the cover of night and took paths that were difficult to detect, avoiding the main roads where Saladin's scouts were likely to be stationed. This element of stealth was crucial. The success of the maneuver depended entirely on achieving tactical surprise, catching the much larger army off guard before it could prepare defensive formations or coordinate a counterattack. The terrain around Montgisard, near modern-day Ramla, played a pivotal role in the unfolding events. The area consisted of rolling plains, interspersed with hills, rivers, and patches of forested land. Baldwin understood that such terrain could neutralize some of the advantages of Saladin's larger force. Narrow passages could funnel troops into choke points, preventing the full weight of the Muslim army from being brought to bear at once. Hills and ridges offered opportunities for the Crusaders to observe enemy movements while remaining concealed. By using the landscape strategically, Baldwin could compensate for the numerical inferiority of his forces and maximize the impact of a surprise assault. The timing of the attack was equally critical. Baldwin's forces approached at a moment when Saladin's army was dispersed, resting or engaged in foraging operations. Many of Saladin's units were spread across a wide area, believing that no significant resistance could appear suddenly. The Crusaders struck with a combination of cavalry charges and infantry support, targeting the command centers and rear elements of Saladin's formation. The psychological shock of facing a determined enemy where none was expected caused confusion and panic among the Muslim forces. This initial chaos was crucial, as it prevented Saladin from effectively organizing a cohesive defense against the far smaller Crusader force. Baldwin himself played a visible role in the attack, riding at the forefront of his knights. Despite the debilitating effects of leprosy, he demonstrated remarkable courage, inspiring his men to fight with unmatched ferocity. His presence reassured the Crusaders and struck fear into Saladin's troops, who were taken aback by the audacity of the attack. The sight of the young, leprous king leading a charge against overwhelming odds reinforced the impression that the Crusaders were fearless and determined, further destabilizing the morale of the larger army. Tactically, the Crusaders exploited Saladin's overconfidence and the dispersal of his forces. They focused on rapid, decisive strikes against isolated units, avoiding prolonged engagement where the numerical superiority of the enemy could be brought to bear. Heavy cavalry charges broke through weak points, while infantry secured key positions and prevented counterattacks. The coordination between different units was precise, a testament to Baldwin's leadership and the discipline of his knights. What the Crusaders lacked in numbers, they made up for in speed, coordination, and the shock value of their attack. Saladin, despite his legendary skill, was caught off guard. Reports suggest that he underestimated the ability of Baldwin's small force to mount a serious attack and was initially unable to respond effectively. The sudden onslaught disrupted command structures and created gaps in the formation, which the Crusaders exploited ruthlessly. Panic spread among the Muslim troops as reports of repeated attacks and unexpected resistance reached the front lines. Some units retreated without orders, while others were encircled and overwhelmed in localized skirmishes. The momentum had shifted unexpectedly, and Saladin found himself reacting to events rather than directing them. The success of Baldwin's maneuver at Montgisard demonstrates the timeless military principles of audacity, surprise, and exploitation of terrain. By striking at the right time and place, Baldwin forced Saladin into a reactive posture, negating the advantages of his superior numbers. The battle became less about raw strength and more about initiative, courage, and strategic cunning. The Crusaders' ability to concentrate force at critical points, combined with the psychological impact of a daring attack, allowed them to achieve what should have been impossible. By the end of the initial engagement, Saladin's army had been thrown into chaos. Units were cut off, leaders were incapacitated or fleeing, and morale had collapsed in many sectors. Baldwin's forces, though vastly outnumbered, exploited this disarray relentlessly, pursuing and capturing key positions and inflicting heavy casualties. The surprise maneuver not only saved Jerusalem from an immediate threat, but also dealt a significant blow to Saladin's aura of invincibility. In retrospect, the Battle of Montgisard highlights the critical importance of intelligence, timing, and leadership in medieval warfare. Baldwin IV's decision to engage a vastly superior force was extraordinarily risky, but it was executed with careful planning, precise timing, and an understanding of both human and military psychology. The Leper King's ability to inspire his troops, exploit the terrain, and strike decisively against an unprepared enemy exemplifies the art of command under extreme pressure. Ultimately, the surprise maneuver at Montgisard transformed the course of the confrontation. What could have been a rout of the Crusaders became a dramatic, morale-boosting victory that resonated across the region. Saladin would later rebuild his army and continue his campaigns, but the memory of that day served as a testament to the extraordinary courage and leadership of Baldwin IV and the indomitable spirit of the Crusader knights who followed him into battle. The Battle of Montgisard on November 25, 1177, stands as one of the most extraordinary military encounters of the medieval era, not only for the astonishing disparity in numbers but for the sheer audacity, courage and strategic brilliance displayed by King Baldwin IV and his small force of Crusader knights. Outnumbered roughly 50-1, Baldwin's army faced what seemed an impossible task: to repel Saladin's 20,000-6,000 strong Muslim force with a contingent of barely 500 knights and a few thousand infantry. Yet through precise planning, audacious execution, and an indomitable spirit, the Crusaders achieved a miraculous victory that would resonate across the Levant and secure Baldwin's legacy as one of history's most remarkable leaders. The battle began with the element of surprise, a factor that Baldwin had meticulously engineered. By choosing to strike at Montgisard, where Saladin's forces were dispersed and unprepared, the Crusaders exploited the weakness inherent in a large army stretched over difficult terrain. Saladin had anticipated minimal resistance and did not expect Baldwin to march his small army into what he presumed was certain defeat. This overconfidence proved catastrophic. When Baldwin's knights charged, they created immediate chaos among the Muslim troops, shattering the cohesion of Saladin's lines and preventing effective coordination between different units. The psychological impact of the attack was immediate. Saladin's troops were stunned by the audacity of the Leper King and his knights, whose bravery seemed almost superhuman given the circumstances. Stories from the battlefield suggest that the mere presence of Baldwin at the forefront of his forces inspired extraordinary valor among his men while sowing panic among the enemy. The young king, despite suffering from leprosy, rode into the heart of the fray, visibly leading the charge and demonstrating that no physical ailment could diminish his resolve. His courage became a force multiplier, elevating the morale of his knights and undermining the confidence of Saladin's army. Tactically, the Crusaders focused on concentrated strikes against vulnerable points. While Saladin's army was massive, its size made it unwieldy and slow to respond to sudden threats. Baldwin's knights exploited this by targeting command centers, rear units and key formations, breaking up Saladin's forces into isolated pockets that could be overwhelmed individually. Cavalry charges struck hard and fast, while infantry secured strategic positions to prevent counterattacks. The disciplined coordination of a small elite force against a larger but disorganized enemy proved decisive. The battle quickly shifted from a confrontation between two armies to a series of rapid, intense engagements in which the Crusaders consistently seized the initiative. One of the most dramatic moments of the battle involved Saladin himself. According to contemporary accounts, the Muslim leader was almost captured during the engagement, his position vulnerable due to the disarray in his ranks. The sight of his army in chaos, combined with relentless attacks from Baldwin's knights, forced him to retreat in order to save his life and regroup his forces. This retreat was not merely a tactical withdrawal, but a sign of a stunning failure in command, a rare occurrence for a commander of Saladin's experience and reputation. For the Crusaders, the fleeing of Saladin's army marked the culmination of a victory that seemed inconceivable at the outset of the battle. The casualties inflicted on Saladin's forces were significant. While precise numbers are difficult to ascertain due to the limitations of medieval record-keeping, estimates suggest that thousands of Muslim soldiers were killed or captured. Many of the prisoners were ransomed, which provided both a moral and material boost to the Crusader kingdom. The defeat also had far-reaching psychological effects. Saladin's aura of invincibility was shattered, and his opponents gained renewed confidence in the ability of the Crusader states to resist the might of Muslim armies. The victory demonstrated that discipline, courage, and strategic insight could outweigh sheer numerical superiority. For the Crusaders, the victory at Montgisard was transformative. It secured Jerusalem from immediate threat, allowing Baldwin IV to consolidate his kingdom and strengthen its defenses. The morale boost among the Crusaders was immense. The victory became a symbol of hope and divine favor, reinforcing the idea that their cause was righteous and supported by providence. Baldwin's leadership, which had combined careful planning, audacity, and personal courage, became the centerpiece of this legendary triumph, enhancing his stature both as a king and as a military commander. The battle also had lasting political implications. Saladin, though temporarily defeated, learned valuable lessons about the risks of overconfidence and the importance of reconnaissance and intelligence. While he would eventually rebuild his forces and continue his campaigns, Montgisard delayed his ambitions and forced him to approach future engagements with greater caution. For the Crusader states, the victory bought crucial time to strengthen fortifications, train troops, and maintain a semblance of stability in a region under constant threat. Baldwin's success demonstrated that strategic brilliance and personal courage could decisively influence the fate of a kingdom, even in the face of overwhelming odds. The legacy of the Battle of Montgisard extends beyond the immediate military and political consequences. It became a defining moment in the narrative of the Crusades, celebrated for the improbable triumph of a small, beleaguered kingdom against a powerful adversary. The battle has been recounted in chronicles and histories as a testament to the combination of courage, strategy, and divine providence. Baldwin IV, despite his debilitating illness, became an enduring symbol of leadership and resilience, embodying the idea that true power is not measured solely in numbers or physical strength, but in vision, determination, and the ability to inspire others. Moreover, Montgisard illustrates timeless principles of warfare that resonate even today. The effective use of intelligence, the element of surprise, concentrated force against critical points, and the psychological impact of leadership were all decisive factors in the battle. Baldwin's ability to assess the enemy, identify weaknesses, and act boldly under extreme pressure transformed what could have been a catastrophic confrontation into a legendary victory. These lessons highlight the enduring relevance of strategic thinking and leadership in military history. In retrospect, the Battle of Montgisard was not just a victory, it was a miracle of medieval warfare. Against overwhelming odds, a small contingent of Crusaders, led by a leprous young king, defeated one of the most formidable armies of the era. The triumph secured the kingdom of Jerusalem, delayed Saladin's conquests, and cemented Baldwin IV's reputation as a masterful and courageous leader. The story of Montgisard serves as a reminder that even in the face of seemingly insurmountable challenges, audacity, skill, and courage can achieve the impossible. The battle's enduring significance lies not only in the military outcome but also in its narrative power. It exemplifies the dramatic tension of the Crusades, the clash between a small, desperate kingdom and a rising power, the interplay of faith and strategy, and the human capacity to overcome adversity through courage and ingenuity. Montgisard remains a symbol of hope, leadership, and the extraordinary potential of individuals to change the course of history, even when faced with overwhelming odds. In conclusion, the Battle of Montgisard stands as a monumental example of how strategy, leadership, and audacity can overcome numerical superiority. King Baldwin IV, the Leper King, defied expectations and history itself, leading a small force of knights to a victory that seemed impossible. The battle reshaped the immediate balance of power in the region, delayed Saladin's ambitions, and secured Jerusalem for the Crusaders for years to come. More importantly, it immortalized Baldwin IV as a figure whose courage and brilliance continue to inspire admiration, illustrating the timeless truth that great leadership can defy even the most formidable challenges.